a dreaded complication that every surgeon fears. So anyway, so what is the definition of endophthalmitis? So endophthalmitis is an intraocular inflammation which is involving the ocular cavities, mainly the vitreous cavity. Okay, so mainly vitreous cavity and or the anterior chamber and their adjacent structures, which can be either infectious or non-infectious. As I said, why is it one of the most dreaded complications? Because one, it is extremely difficult to treat, and second, because the inflammation involves the vitreous cavity, the drugs penetration, I'm sorry, it's written presentation, the drug penetration is poor into the vitreous and the load of pathogen is quite high in the vitreous. Okay, so endophthalmitis can be classified according to infectivity. Okay, whether it could be infective or non-infective, that is, it could be sterile, or it could be exogenous or endogenous based on the mode of entry and based on the type of etiological agent that is there. So what is our classification for the same? Now, there can be sterile inflammation or it could be an infectious inflammation. Now, sterile inflammation could be because of uveitis. So I guess you can say it's a kind of pan-uveitis where the entire vitreous cavity is having inflammation and then it has entered into the anterior chamber also. Now that is a separate entity by itself. Today I'll be mainly talking about infectious type of endophthalmitis. So what is how do you classify it? As we said, so it could be an endogenous or an exogenous. So what does endogenous mean? Means there is a foci of infection within the body and it has not started in the eye, but most commonly it is septicemia, which will then through the bloodstream enter into the ocular blood flow and then enter into the ocular tissues, which can lead to endophthalmitis. Then other one, the more common one, is called the exogenous type of infection, in which there is the bacterial or infective foci is inoculated from the outside world. So it could be post-traumatic, which could be an intraocular foreign body, or it could be post-operative, which is the most common type of exogenous infection. And last, it could be something called blebitis. So blebitis, as you know, there is a bleb which is formed after glaucoma surgery. An infection of such bleb is called as blebitis. Now, post-operative is the most common one, and it is classified based on the time of presentation after the surgery has happened. Fulminant is when it has occurred within a few days. Acute is after 1 week, about say 1 week, and chronic is if it has happened after 3 months. So, depending on the etiological agent, endophthalmitis is classified very simply as bacterial, fungal, viral, or parasitic. Okay, quite simple. Most of your organisms that you know about through microbiology, most of them can cause endophthalmitis. So the most common ones are gram-positive bacteria. Next, coming to gram-negative bacteria and fungi. Now in India, they say that gram-negative and gram-positive are almost equal. This whatever is written 75 to 85%, etc. It is more, this type of infections are more common in the Western world, but in India, a few studies have shown that gram-negative also are quite common, and almost there's a 50-50% of having gram-negative or gram-positive bacteria. Okay, so the most common organism that lot of diseases in the eye are caused by Staphylococcus. It's a very common entity which causes a lot of infections. Dacrocystitis is one where Staphylococcus aureus is implicated, and so it is implicated even in endophthalmitis. So you have Staph epidermidis. Now Staph epidermidis, it is a bacterial commensal in our conjunctival sac. That's why it is the most common cause of endophthalmitis. So normally our eye is completely closed. There is no chance for the bacteria from the outside to go inside the eye. However, when we do any type of intraocular surgery, we are opening up the eye. So these bacteria can go into the eye and then will cause endophthalmitis. So we have gram-positive bacteria, then we have gram-negative bacteria. A very common one, almost all of you know, is Pseudomonas, the most commonly hospital-acquired infection and very difficult to treat. And then we have fungi, Aspergillus, Fusarium, or Cephalosporium. Even Candida is commonly there, which causes this kind of endophthalmitis. So, mota sa, gram-positive, your staph and strep, gram-negative, Pseudomonas, and fungi, you have Aspergillus, Fusarium, and Candida. Now, exogenous endophthalmitis. So in this, what happens? We have the vitreous, as I said, is the primary site of involvement. It is usually it starts off in the aqueous because say as I'll be coming into post-operative type of endophthalmitis, the most common entry is through the anterior chamber because it's very difficult for a direct exogenous bacteria to enter the vitreous. So it commonly involves the aqueous, and then from the aqueous goes into the vitreous. And these two areas are the primary sites of involvement. Secondary involvement, after some more time, they will enter into the retina and then into the uvea. And basically, there are three types. They're mainly post-operative, post-traumatic, or associated with bleb. Now, post-op endophthalmitis. It is overall incidence among is only about 0.05%. However, within each type of endophthalmitis, it is the most common there. Now, let us see which surgeries are commonly predisposing to endophthalmitis. Now, if we see ECC, basically when they talk about ECCE, they're talking about all kinds of extracapsular cataract extraction. Basically, the ECC that we all know, what we read about in surgeries, SICS is also an ECCE, and even phaco is an ECCE. Because all of these, you're not removing the capsule, you're removing only the cataractus lens. So whether ECC is done with or without IOL, this is the one of the most common causes of endophthalmitis, just by the fact that it is one of the most common surgeries that is done. And an important thing here is the integrity of the posterior capsule. If any case there is a posterior capsular rent, then if there is infection of the anterior chamber, it can more easily pass into the posterior chamber and lead to an endophthalmitis. Now, secondary PCIOL, say there was a surgery that has been done, and at the time we were not able to implant an intraocular IOL, intraocular lens. So a secondary surgery will be required. So the eye has to be opened again. And usually secondary surgeries are done in cases where there is inadequate PC support, inadequate posterior capsular support. So we need to put in a second IOL after that surgery has been done. So there is a higher chance of infection in such cases. Other surgeries like PK is penetrating keratoplasty. So that also has a higher incidence of endophthalmitis, and we have glaucoma filtration surgeries. Now let's talk about pars plana vitrectomy. Now this is a surgery that is done for many cases. The most commonly which you may be knowing is for retinal detachment, where we do a vitrectomy, where you have to go into the eye, remove the vitreous gel, and then settle the or treat the retinal detachment. Now, pars plana vitrectomy can also lead to endophthalmitis. However, it is the least common surgery after which endophthalmitis is seen, because see, now you can see the blue box. When the vitreous gel itself has been removed, there is no scaffold for the organism to grow. Pars plana vitrectomy is also a treatment of endophthalmitis by itself. Okay, so endophthalmitis there is infection in the vitreous cavity, and vitreous cavity, that is the vitreous gel. Now, if you remove that vitreous gel, the load of pathogen decreases, and that is one of our treatment options for endophthalmitis. So already you're removing the vitreous, and in pars plana vitrectomy you're removing that vitreous, so there is no scaffold for these organisms to grow. Now, what could be the source of infection? Now, it could be airborne. Now, patient is lying on the surgical table. If you have seen surgeries, so we commonly clean and drape the patient. We put some drapes, we cover the nose of the patient so that none of these pathogens from the nose or mouth can enter into the eye. So it could be respiratory origin. It could be even respiratory origin from the surgeon themselves. Say surgeon is not wearing his mask properly, he is sick, or he or she is sick, and the pathogens from his nose, if they may enter into the eye and cause the infection. Next is the air conditioning in the OT. If there are very specific guidelines of how the operation theater air conditioning should be to maintain proper asepsis, and if this air conditioning is faulty, dirty air from outside can enter the OT and then into the eye. Next is the solutions and medications. So we'll use a lot of drugs and solutions during our surgeries. We use bottles with BSS, which is those irrigating fluids that we get. We use viscoelastic substances. We use lots of drops and ointments, etc. And all of these things can be sources of infection. Next is the tissue, the periocular skin, our lid margin, lashes, our conjunctival sac, lacrimal sac, nasal mucosa, corneal grafts, etc. can all be sources of infection. So before we do any cataract surgery, we should always make sure there is no foci of infection in a particular patient. And if there is a foci of infection near the eye, we should treat that foci of infection before going in for surgery. Dacrocystorhinostomy, if the patient has nasolacrimal duct obstruction, then you may have to do a DCR surgery first and then go in for cataract surgery. So in case when you're giving your viva and your consultant asks you if the regurgitation test is positive, so you will always say, I will treat the regurgitation first, I will do a DCR first, and then only go in for cataract surgery, because the chances of endophthalmitis is extremely high after that if the DCR is not done. Then other objects and materials, your surgical instruments, if they're not sterilized properly, if your gloves are not sterile, your masks, your IOLs, etc., they can all lead to source of infection. Now, what is the clinical importance? It is all these causes are preventable. So if an infection happens within a few days after surgery, there has been more probably a fault of the sterility that is there, which has led to endophthalmitis. And it's a very important medico-legal case for an ophthalmologist if the infection occurs within a few days after surgery. Now, what are the risk factors? The same things which we were talking about before. One is the preoperative risk factors. As I said, if there is any infection in and around the eye, it will lead to an increased chance of endophthalmitis. Next, what are the operative risk factors? As I said, if the wounds are not, if your wound construction is not proper, and after the surgery there is some wound gape, the wound has not sealed properly, then infections can enter from there. Then I told you PC rent and vitreous loss. So as I was talking about ECCE with or without IOLs, so the most important factor is the intact posterior capsule. So a lot of times there may be some amount of infection that may reach some amount of few bacterial cells that may reach the aqueous chamber, but the aqueous has a good immune system, much better than the vitreous. So this immune system is able to take care of that bacteria. However, if there was a posterior capsular rent, these bacteria can easily migrate to the posterior chamber and cause inflammation and infection of the vitreous, and prolonged surgeries also, and contaminated irrigating solutions. Now, as we are talking about types of presentation, so we are talking about fulminant, acute, and chronic. So fulminant is if it occurs within 4 days. The most common are gram-negative organisms and Staph aureus. Then we are coming to acute, which occurs after 4 to 7 days. The most common one is Staphylococcus epidermidis, as I was talking, and chronic. Last time by mistake I said chronic is after 3 months. It's actually after 1 month. So after 4 weeks, chronic endophthalmitis can occur. and it could be delayed entry or it could be delayed onset. Delayed entry means there is still the wound is open, or there is some area from which the um, organisms have gotten an easy entry into the eye. So there is bleb related endophthalmitis, and here streptococcus is one of the most common causes of bleb related endophthalmitis. Now there could be something called as delayed onset. In this delayed onset, the particle or organism is already there in the eye, but it has not presented in the first few weeks, it has presented later. So Propionibacterium acne is one, and the fungal infections are ones which can cause chronic endophthalmitis. Now let us come to post-traumatic. Now in post-traumatic, now I've given a few percentages here, but this is not important for you. What you should mainly know is after trauma, again, trauma is a way of introducing the pathogen into the eye. So penetrating ocular traumas are the main culprits here. After any trauma with a knife, with the iron particle, rod, leaf, thorn, etc. So these things, if they have caused a complete perforation, so commonly, or a penetration into the eye, these will inoculate bacteria into the vitreous chamber. So in this, two important ones are Bacillus cereus and your Staph epidermidis. Now, bleb-related endophthalmitis, as I told you, it happens after glaucoma filtration surgery, and it can occur at any time, many months or years after the surgery. And most of the time, it goes through the intact bleb and via the conjunctival flora. It is a very poor, already endophthalmitis is a poor prognosis disease. Matlab, it's quite difficult to treat, and on top of the bleb related ones are even more difficult, because the thing is the bleb is always present. Now the organisms have entered through the bleb, and now you cannot do anything to the bleb. You cannot remove the bleb or remove that site of infection, because you need the filtration that it is providing. So you cannot remove the root cause of that endophthalmitis, so it becomes more difficult to treat. As I said, streptococci, either fecalis, viridans, or pneumoniae, is the most common cause of bleb-related endophthalmitis. Now, in the clinical signs, what will you see? You will see an infected bleb. It will be associated with vitritis and hypopyon. So, any infection or inflammation of the vitreous is called as vitritis, and that is the most important thing to look for in endophthalmitis. Here is a picture of the bleb. This is the cornea below. So we have the cornea here. This is the rest of the conjunctiva. This is the bleb. You can see it is very white, cystic type of bleb. And actually, it's not very clear here, but there's some kind of yellowish type of substance here. So most probably indicating some type of infection. So what are the risk factors? Which types of some types of glaucoma surgeries will have higher risk of endophthalmitis. So what are they? Use of anti-mitotic agents. If you have read about this, so you may remember something called as mitomycin C. So mitomycin C is commonly used in our glaucoma surgeries. And if mitomycin, previously many years back, mitomycin C wasn't used. It is being used after certain, like not recently, but the first type of glaucoma surgeries didn't use antimitotic agents, and now they're being used more commonly. But the use of these antimitotic agents has increased the incidence of endophthalmitis. Next is inferior blebs. Why inferior blebs? See, superior, any type of port or anything superiorly is covered by our eyelid. And eyelid, because of its vascularity, because of the conjunctiva there, the immune system is there, so it will help to kill the bacteria even before it enters into the eye. However, if they're inferior, our lower lid doesn't cover such a large part of our eye, so these will have higher chances of going into infection. Now, so basically, what is blebitis and bleb related endophthalmitis? What is the main difference? Blebitis is just an infection of the bleb. And now this blebitis, if the infection of the bleb enters into the vitreous chamber, that is when it becomes bleb-related endophthalmitis. And so, as I was telling you before, anterior chamber infections can be more easily controlled. Posterior posterior segment inflammations are very, very difficult to control. Now, endogenous endophthalmitis, it is because of hematogenous spread of organisms from distant sources. Retina and choroid are primarily involved because of their high vascularity. Fungal type of endophthalmitis is more common than bacterial, and Candida is more common than Aspergillus. The predisposing factors, all the immunosuppressive conditions, most of your immunosuppressive conditions were diabetes, immunosuppressive conditions like AIDS, malignancies, recent major abdominal surgeries, intravenous drug abuses, etc. will lead. So, as I was telling you, there is no structural defect in the globe. Now, let us go to the signs and symptoms of endophthalmitis. So, decreased blood, a sudden, very commonly post-operative endophthalmitis comes with sudden, severe, acute loss of vision. And as I was telling you, for any surgeon, for him to get a call from the emergency and to say that, sir, ma'am, one case of yours has come with sudden, who was operated few days back, has come with sudden diminution of vision, the ophthalmologist palpitations will start, because he just hopes that, he hopes, or he or she hopes, that there is no endophthalmitis for the patient. So the patient with endophthalmitis will come with pain, photophobia, redness of the eyes, swollen eyelids, discharge. Now, as you can see, it's just an infection. So all your orbital structures in and around your orbit start getting infected. This sounds like conjunctivitis, but one of the important things is photophobia. Conjunctivitis won't have photophobia. Any type of inflammation, even uveitis, will have photophobia. And as I was saying, uveitis is something like endophthalmitis, but it is non-infective, right? So patient has pain, he has photophobia, he has redness of eyes, he has swollen eyelids, he has discharge, okay, he has floaters, and he may rarely also have fever if it is a kind of endogenous endophthalmitis. Now, you have to do your ocular examination. Now, in any ophthalmic disease, it is always, the books will give you only the main important findings. So one easy way I found to remember things, whether it be ophtho or any other subject, it's always best to go from anterior to posterior. Just think about, okay, so you have endophthalmitis, so you can just start, okay, so what will happen in the eyelids? What will happen in the conjunctiva? What will happen in the cornea? What will happen in the anterior chamber? What will happen to the iris? What will happen to the lens? So if you are reading it or studying it in a particular what do you say, order, right? So automatically your brain can come up with certain answers. Even if you've forgotten one or two things, your brain, okay, so what can happen in the cornea? Okay, what can happen in the anterior chamber? So some small things will come back to you. So any ophthalmic disease, you always start with visual acuity. So you will ask about, you will write in your answer about endophthalmitis, I will first check the visual acuity. If the visual acuity is severely reduced, that means there is higher pathogen load. If it is not severely reduced, so there is lower pathogen load. So it gives us prognostic significance. Next is to look for ocular motility. Commonly in the early stages of endophthalmitis, ocular motility is not affected much. But in the later stages of the disease, the infection has reached into the orbit and can lead to reduced motility of the eye. Next, you come to eyelids. You see that they're swollen and patient may have blepharospasm. Next, you can come to your conjunctiva. You talk about hyperemia, chemosis, bleb examination if present. Cornea. Any type of inflammation in the eye commonly will lead to edematous cornea. High IOPs is one thing, and inflammation of the eye. These two things can cause corneal edema. So higher IOPs, because there is inflammation in the anterior chamber, it can lead to inflammation of the trabecular meshwork and will lead to reduced aqueous drainage. and this is lead to edematous cornea. Sometimes there can be opacification of the cornea if it is long standing. There may be Descemet membrane folds in the cornea, and inflammation. So there is infection, and then there is the immune response against the infection. So this immune response will cause keratic precipitates, which we see in uveitis. This kind of keratic precipitates will be seen on the endothelium or of the cornea. There'll be multiple infiltrates in the cornea. Sometimes you can find the reason or cause for endophthalmitis when you examine the cornea. Now, in such cases, as I was saying, the wound is the most important part of through which the organism can enter. So when you are looking at the cornea, look at the wound, see what kind of surgery was done. Was it an SICS surgery? Was it a phacoemulsification? So depending on the type of surgery and type of wound, you can see, okay, so there is a wound gape. This may be the cause for endophthalmitis, like that. Next, you can look for any signs of trauma in the eye if there is any penetration into the eye. Next, after cornea, we come to the anterior chamber. You see multiple cells, flare, fibrinous exudates, and hypopyon. All the signs of uveitis. So what is cells? Cells is the immune response against the bacteria. So these cells will enter into the anterior chamber to reduce the infection. So you will see cells. Now there will be fibrinous exudates. Any immune reaction will lead to some kind of exudation. Our immune cells are releasing a lot of these enzymes to kill the bacteria, which can cause exudation. And this hypopyon is nothing but settling down of all the white blood cells. They will settle down in the eye and lead to formation of an hypopyon. Next, you go to the iris. Iris also, basically all of these signs are of inflammation. So iris becomes muddy, boggy, that's poorly dilating pupil because it is like the iris muscles also are inflamed, so they're not working to their best of their abilities, and there will be posterior synechiae also. This is an important finding. After iris, you should always come to pupil. They say the pupil, they say the retina is the I forgot that way they say it. Window to the brain. I'm so very sorry. Yeah, so retina is the window to the brain, right? So pupil is also extremely important. If a patient has sluggishly reacting pupils, it is a very, very bad prognostic sign, and it's worrisome if the pupil reactions are not good. So pupil should always be examined before you dilate the patient and do any further examination. Now the lens, behind the pupil we have the lens. Sometimes there is membranes over the lens, or then if it's a post-operative case, then there may be exudates around the IOL. Behind the lens we come to the vitreous. Now I said there is infection in the vitreous, so the immune cells are there in the vitreous. So this will lead to vitritis and exudation within the vitreous. And when you see the fundus, because the vitreous is filled with cells, our glow, the light that we throw into the eye, is not reflected back out of the eye properly. So there is a very poor red glow and no fundal view. And sometimes if the vitritis is not severe, you may be able to see the fundus, in which again these inflammatory cells have started affecting the rest of the eye. So it will affect the optic nerve head, leading to papillitis. It will affect the retina and choroid, leading to multiple white lesions or exudation within the retina and choroid. And any exudation in the retina will be associated with retinal hemorrhage and periphlebitis. Now, IOP is usually low and maybe high in early cases. Initially, it will be low because there's inflammation of the ciliary body, and then later on it may be high. So we'll come to signs, and then so we have finished it. We have seen the entire examination. Now we come to see signs of penetrating injury or any intraocular foreign body if it is a case of trauma. And as I said, we look for areas of wound dehiscence, which could be the place where the pathogens have entered. These are just some pictures showing the left side top. We have this entire eye which is filled with exudation. Here, this is a slit lamp showing complete anterior chamber reaction with some hypopyon here. Then we have, this is a post-PK patient where there's infiltrates here. This wound is getting infected here, and from here the pathogens have gone into the eye. Now fungal, it could be caused by Candida, Aspergillus, Fusarium. The causes are a delayed postoperative endophthalmitis, endogenous endophthalmitis in immunocompromised patients. So as we talk about fungal corneal ulcers, so we're talking about fungal endophthalmitis also, where there are more signs than symptoms. So there'll be minimal pain and mild external ocular involvement. However, the signs will be much more. There will be progressive iridocyclitis and vitritis and yellow-white choroidal lesions, which may be single or multiple. Now, so these were the signs. So now we have said, okay, this patient has come. I'm seeing a lot of reaction. The glow is not present. So what could it be? It could be endophthalmitis. Now, how will you do what investigations will you do? Now, clinical examination is your first and foremost way of diagnosing endophthalmitis. Second is to do a tap. So what do you call a tap? So you can take these intraocular fluids and send them for culture sensitivity and gram staining, etc. So you can either take from the anterior chamber, you can take some aqueous and send it, or you can take directly vitreous and send it for examination. So now we have gram stain, Giemsa stain, and cultures that are to be done. So these are regular microbiological stains that are done to look for, as I said, the gram negative, gram positive bacteria or fungi, and then the standard media that are used to check for these the growth and culture sensitivity of these organisms. Nowadays, PCR testing is also come up, which can even detect even the smallest amount of pathogen. However, not very easily available to most patients. Next, an ultrasound examination is one of the most important examinations of endophthalmitis. Very commonly, so I told you it is the vitreous inflammation which is causing uh, endophthalmitis per se. So, but because of the inflammation, the pupil doesn't dilate well, the glow is not seen. So you're not sure you're not able to see the posterior segment properly. So ultrasound will be able to see vitritis. In an ultrasound, you can see the vitritis of the eye. You can see multiple vitreous membranes, opacities. You can see the anatomical status of the retina, whether it is associated with retinal detachment. You can see the extent of inflammation. Commonly, we do an ultrasound before starting treatment and then serial ultrasounds after treatment to see if the vitreous exudation has reduced and to see if our management is working, to look for intraocular foreign body. Rarely CT scans are not commonly done. It's the ultrasound which gives us the best picture. And then we can do also something called as an electroretinogram, which basically tells us about the status of the retina to know whether the retina is still healthy or not. Because if it is grossly abnormal, even complete treatment of endophthalmitis will show a poor prognosis. For endogenous endophthalmitis, you will do your entire blood culture. Blood workup has to be done to look for signs of infection in the body or if you look for any malignancies. Now, let's come to the management. So what are your main goals? Basically to give him his best useful vision that he can get, minimize infection with antimicrobial agents, reduce the inflammation, and give the patient symptomatic relief. What are the different modalities of treatment? So first you have to give antibiotics. So it is infection, we have to give antibiotics. It could be intravitreal, topical, or systemic. So you're giving all types of drugs into the body so that you want to try and penetrate and bring maximum concentration of the drug into the vitreous. So you're giving antibiotics. Then you want to reduce the inflammation. So you're giving anti-inflammatory drug like steroids, topical, periocular, systemic. Now, steroids should never be given in cases of fungal etiological cases because the steroidal drugs will worsen fungal infection. So you should be very careful. Steroid should not be started until you know for sure that it could be a bacterial infection, and it should always be given under the cover of antibiotics. Lastly, you will maybe have to do surgical intervention, that is the vitrectomy. Now, intravitreal injections is the preferred route of giving antibiotics to the endophthalmitis patients. You have to give them directly administered in the vitreous. We cannot, by giving topical drugs, the penetration is very poor in the vitreous. So you directly go and inject them into the vitreous cavity. So the commonly used drugs are vancomycin and ceftazidime. These two, just if you want, you can learn these dosages, but if you just know the names, it's more than enough. Vancomycin and ceftazidime. Vancomycin is acting against the gram-positive organisms, and ceftazidime, a third-generation cephalosporin, is acting against the gram-negative organisms. Now, systemic antibiotics is commonly given for penetrating ocular injuries and endogenous and bacterial endophthalmitis. For postoperative endophthalmitis, studies have shown that there is poor role of IV antibiotics. However, most surgeons do give IV antibiotics because there is no clear-cut guideline saying that they are completely useless. Next, fluoroquinolones like ciprofloxacin have shown that they may be helpful, so those are commonly given. Now, role of steroids, I told you should rule out fungal etiology, so you should not give it in fungal endophthalmitis. Their main mechanism is to reduce the inflammation clinically and histopathologically and limit ocular damage, because even if there is infection, lot of the damage is caused by the inflammatory cells trying to kill the bacteria. So all these enzymes that they're releasing to kill the bacteria will inadvertently affect the retina choroid and cause their destruction. So what is the treatment of fungal endophthalmitis? Now, if there is fungal indications are if there was a pre-existing fungal keratitis which has led to endophthalmitis, so you know it is fungal. And if there is a fungal endogenous endophthalmitis which is culture positive, you will give intravitreal antifungal. Now, commonly used ones are amphotericin or voriconazole, and steroids are contraindicated. So these are systemic antifungals like amphotericin, fluconazole, ketoconazole, itraconazole, flucytosine. No need to know the dosages, nothing, just know that yes, amphotericin B can be given, voriconazole can be given. And one more thing is amphotericin B is quite toxic to the eye. वैसे you may know now Mucor has come up. Amphotericin B is quite a toxic drug in itself, whether it is given IV, oral, especially intraocular, it's quite toxic to the rest of the body tissue, so it has to be used judiciously. Now, vitrectomy. Why? As I told you, infection is in the vitreous, so you need to remove the vitreous and help to reduce the load of pathogen. So after you do a vitrectomy, you can take some of the vitreous that you have done the vitrectomy of and send this for culture sensitivities. Now, these cases will give you the maximum chance of finding the what type of pathogen is there. So advantages are that it gives more material for culture, especially in fungal patients. It removes the inflammatory mediators, organisms, and toxins. It removes the source of infection. It gives a better dispersion of antibiotics in the vitreous. It clears the media and allows us for a better posterior segment visualization. And it removes the vitreous membranes, which may be a source of late traction and subsequent detachment. So what is your prevention? Now, this is the treatment. Yes, we have gotten it. We know how to treat but prevention is always better than cure, especially in endophthalmitis. So what are you doing preoperatively? Remove the risk factors. If there are any conditions, treat them first. And most important one is betadine eye drop. Povidone iodine is found to be one of the best ways of reducing the ocular, this commensals, to kill some amount of the commensals and prevent their entry into the eye. So betadine is extremely important. Proper draping and sterility techniques, and giving topical antibiotics before the surgery. Intraoperatively, they say irrigation of anterior chamber with vancomycin, not commonly used. What we do is we use gentamicin, and we put some of the gentamicin into these irrigating solutions that we use. So we put gentamicin in the irrigating fluid, and so then it is there within the fluid and it keeps passing through the eye. And postoperatively, immediately after the any surgery, a subconjunctival antibiotic is given. Usually gentamicin is given just subconjunctivally, so that for some time immediately after the surgery, there is some antibiotic cover. Now, how to prevent Dreb-related endophthalmitis? So early diagnosis and treatment of any conjunctivitis. Contact lens wear should be discouraged. There should be treatment of the associated periocular infections. Okay, now trauma. So what are the obviously prevent trauma, to prevent any trauma related endophthalmitis. You have to give safety goggles to people who are working in such conditions, and timely and appropriate management of ocular trauma. Sometimes patients get injured and do not come immediately. They come from a village, they come from far away. All this travel through dirty areas, dust going into the eye, all of these things. Already the eye is open and the patient is spending a lot of time outside, etc. So the chances of infection increases, and the earlier it is treated, the lesser chances of endophthalmitis. Now, endogenous is adequate and timely management of systemic illnesses, IV drug abuse reduction, and control of all predisposing factors. So guys, I'm done with the class. I'll just go to, I have a small YouTube and Instagram channel under the name of Dr. Extra Chutney. I'm so if you guys are interested, please go check it out. And yeah, chalo. Thank you guys. Done for the class for today. Any questions, you could put it up into the chat here and I'll answer them. Okay, then no question then. Okay, shall I end the class?